Kicking off at number 5, Coral Castle. And no, that is not my imitation of Rick Grimes trying to call his son a fortified structure. Sorry, that was a terrible joke. But the actual mystery of Coral Castle is equal parts true engineering enigma and equal parts perhaps the most American thing that you've ever heard of. Along the highways and byways of rural America, there are countless tourist attractions that litter the way, but one of them in particular may actually have a much more intriguing mystery than the rest. Just before 1920, a Latvian man named Edward Leedskalnin was jilted by his young bride just a day before their wedding, and so dejected and depressed, Edward left his home country to head to America. Here, after becoming a recluse and discovering a strange affinity for magnetism, Edward spent the next 28 years constructing a bizarre megalithic castle from oolite, a limestone sediment similar to coral. Now, although the vast majority of this structure now is ruinous, which operates as a popular tourist attraction on the roadside, the actual structural properties of Coral Castle have baffled people for decades. Given the fact that Leedskalnin worked completely alone, shifting over 1,000 tons of oolite rock into place with no conventional machinery and no other means of hauling such a large amount of minerals and materials. As the legend goes, at one point a few local teenagers claimed to have stumbled upon Leedskalnin working on the structure late at night, reporting that he had caused the blocks of coral to move like hydrogen balloons, floating perfectly into place without the aid of any tools. Strangely enough, this led to wild rumours that Leedskalnin was using telekinesis to build the castle, a claim which he refuted. In fact, the only tool that Leedskalnin ever spoke of using was a machine that he referred to as a perpetual motion holder. Before his death, whenever he was asked how he constructed the place, he simply stated that he understood the laws of weight and leverage well, and on several occasions he stated publicly that he had discovered the secrets of the pyramids, and that once you know how to do it, it's easy. I mean, this one is a little tongue-in-cheek, but what do you guys think? Another eccentric recluse with too much time on his hands, or a structural genius that had insight into a long forgotten knowledge? Let me know. Coming in at number 4, Caspar Hauser. And who the hell was Caspar Hauser? A mystery that has completely perplexed historians for nearly 2 centuries, leading to an insane web of speculation, an entire network of conspiracy that extends its tendrils all the way to the royalty of Napoleon. On the 26th of May 1828, a teenage boy appeared on the streets of Nuremberg, Germany. His name was Caspar, a boy of 16. He was filthy, could speak only a few words, and had a letter with him addressed to a captain of the Bavarian cavalry. He kept repeating the phrase, "I want to be a cavalryman as my father was," in Old Bavarian, but the city guard dismissed his ramblings and imprisoned him as just another vagabond in Nuremberg Castle. His strange origin drew the attention of the city's mayor, who claimed that despite his stunted appearance, the boy had an excellent memory and was quick to learn. Eventually, after befriending the mayor, Caspar spoke of what he could remember of his life before, and explained in great detail at living totally alone in a darkened cell 2 meters long, 1 meter wide. Each morning, Caspar said, he would wake to find rye bread and water next to his bed. Periodically, he said the water would taste bitter, and after drinking it, he would sleep more heavily than usual, where he'd wake up to find his hair and his nails had been cut. Caspar claimed that the first human he had contact with was a mysterious man dressed in a dark hood, his face completely covered. He taught him to write his name and taught him the same phrase he would repeat when he was found. Eventually, this story led the European aristocracy to believe that Caspar was an exiled prince, held captive for his entire life to prevent a line of succession. As the year passed, Caspar would live and learn in many of the Bavarian noble houses, where allegedly there were many attempts on his life by the same hooded men that he had described in the darkened cell. They got him in the end though, and on the 14th of December 1833 he was mysteriously stabbed and he died 3 days later. On his grave in Latin read the words, "Here lies a mysterious one who was killed in a mysterious manner." Beats me. Next up at number 3, the mystery of Oak Island. And whilst many of you will know this particular entry, there's no denying the fact that the eternal mystery that is Oak Island is worth mentioning every single damn time, and its inception is an event that has long evaded the unscrupulous eye of history. You know the story, right? In Nova Scotia, just off the coast of eastern Canada, lies a small island that has allegedly been the site of our civilization's greatest of treasures, although no one has ever been able to locate the exact point of where that treasure treasure lies, causing countless individuals to fall into a wild obsession with unearthing its eternal mystery. In fact, the cause of Oak Island's mystery is down to the fact people have found treasure there, many of which have been carbon dated to several hundred years old, and the story of the Money Pit, a mysterious shaft that has been excavated countless times throughout history, which actually exists with actual structural records, has forced dozens of businesses to go bankrupt trying to solve its enigma. So here we are with our mystery. Who the hell built this place? Now, there are hundreds of theories as to who would have constructed such an intricate place to conceal their treasure, the most popular being Captain William Kidd, the pirate that sailed to North America in the late 1600s, burying his plunder there so no one else could find it. Another theory states that the pit was constructed to house none other than Mary Antoinette's jewels, who after the Parisian uprising at the Palace of Versailles gave her treasures to a lady-in-waiting, who then fled France and ended up in Nova Scotia, where using her royal connections contracted the French Navy to construct the Oak Island pit, making sure that the incredibly rare jewels of her queen would never be discovered. And strangely enough, there has actually been credible evidence for this theory recently in 2017, when a 500-year-old brooch was discovered containing a huge garnet similar to that of which Mary Antoinette was reported to often wear. I mean, we could talk about all of these theories for an entire video, but as so far as unsolved events in history go, this one remains to be exactly that. Swinging in at number 2, the Yonaguni Monument. Okay, where do we even begin with this one? Because if you've seen any of our Ancient Mysteries series, then this one definitely deserves its place amongst their ilk. But the event that we're possibly alluding to in the case of the Yonaguni Monument may be a geological enigma that predates known civilization itself, involving an entire continent submerging deep beneath the ocean. Yeah, and whilst that may sound like a massive leap, let's just take a look at the strange properties of the Yonaguni Monument before we jump to any kind of conclusions. Off the coast of Japan, submerged beneath the southernmost Ryukyu Islands, lie a formation of potentially man-made monoliths, which has led to decades of debate as to the true nature of this strange geological formation. The monument itself consists of very fine sandstone and mudstone, with its main feature being a rectangular formation measuring about 90 feet tall and consisting of several other strange formations that seemingly don't make sense as to how they have been naturally formed. Now, despite this massive debate between the Yonaguni Monument being natural or man-made, perhaps the most mind-blowing theory comes from the renowned geologist Robert Schoch of Boston University, who states that the Yonaguni Monument is indeed most likely a natural formation, possibly used and modified by humans in the past, before seemingly sliding away to the murky depths of the ocean during a geological event that occurred in ancient history. On the flip side, the geologist that discovered the monument, Masaki Kimura, claimed that the structure was undoubtedly artificial, created by an ancient civilization at least 10,000 years ago, accurately carved and created before sliding into the ocean following unknown tectonic activity. Kimura also goes on to say that not only that, but he can also identify a nearby pyramid, castles, entire roads, other monuments, an entire stadium at the bottom of the ocean. Yeah, this one is quite something. What do you guys think? Let me know. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the creation of Baalbek. Because, holy moly, if this one isn't one of the most mysterious unsolved events in history, I'm not entirely sure what is. Who the hell built Baalbek in Lebanon, the most mysterious ruins of the entire Roman Empire, a monumental, supposedly 2,000-year-old temple to the god Jupiter that sits atop 3 separate 1,000-ton stone blocks? To put it into perspective, the monoliths at Stonehenge weigh about 1/40th of that. Yeah, you heard that correctly. 1,000-ton stone blocks. And despite being the diligent record keepers that they were, there is no record of who ordered this temple to be built, how these monolithic stones were cut, why they were cut, or how they even came to be, and how the temple itself came to be abandoned, because for the most part, whoever built Baalbek just up and left. Now, there are many mythological and cultural legends as to the origins of Baalbek. Some say that Cain built it to hide away from the wrath of God. Others say that giants built it at the command of Nimrod, which would eventually become the Tower of Babel. In fact, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, some claim that the intergalactic landing pad alluded to in its tale was in itself Baalbek, a site constructed purely for the reception of ancient astronauts. In fact though, the actual mystery of Baalbek resides more within its geographical location. What was the point in cutting such enormous rocks out in the middle of nowhere? Why was this temple even built where it was? And why would the Romans go to such great lengths to create a structure that wasn't efficient in location instead of next to a major city or a port? The Romans weren't exactly known for doing things without efficiency and purpose. That's what made them so successful after all. In fact, Baalbek seems so out of character to have been built by the Romans that many scholars completely eschew any historical engineering correlation with them and simply state that the Romans never built Baalbek but discovered it and then added their iconic pillars to Jupiter and repurposed the ruins as their own kind of temple. Yeah, I'm stumped guys. The construction of Baalbek, who made it, when they did, how they did it and why they did it remains to be one of the most mysterious events in history. Kicking off at number 5, Stone Tongue. Which again is a pretty damn awesome name for a death metal band, right? But if you're a fan of this series, you'll already know that lists like these are literal golden skull mines for naming yourselves in all your death metal glory. So metalheads that are looking for a band name, take note, please. And also, thank me later. Anyway, Stone Tongue. Let's first cast our gaze back to 1991 in Northamptonshire, Britain, where archaeologists discovered a gruesome and even stranger mutilation that emerged from the remains of Roman Britain. Now, it's no hidden secret that Britain is littered with instances of intrigue from the Roman occupation of Britain, but this one in particular seemingly doesn't fit any sort of logic, or any of the many other mysteries of ancient Britain. At the bottom of a burial pit, buried beneath dozens of other bodies, archaeologists found the skeleton of a man whose tongue had apparently been amputated and instead replaced with a flat stone wedged into his mouth. The burial site at Stanwick near the River Nene dates back from between the 3rd or 4th centuries, where people in Roman Britain would have congregated in small farming communities. Now, it's certainly not rare to find makeshift burial pits in Roman Britain. In fact, they are a dime a dozen. But the strange thing was, this guy was buried at the bottom, face down. And not only was he buried face down, which would usually indicate some sort of fear of him by the community, but his tongue was cut out and replaced with a stone. As researchers noted, this was something that just hasn't ever been identified as a practice so far in archaeological records. There are no other known occurrences of this ever happening in Roman Britain, so far anyway. And the fact that this was on top of the matter of him being buried face down, well, who the hell was he? What was he doing? It is believed that the man would have been in his 30s at the time of his death, and one theory is that he had mental health issues and was actually responsible for severing his own tongue. Perhaps the tongue was the community symbolically making him whole again, but then why was he buried face down? Now, archaeologists are currently trying to correlate this practice to ancient Germanic laws, but its place in a small farming community in Roman Britain, yeah, that remains a complete and utter mystery. Swinging in at number 4, Khatt Shebib. And I absolutely love this one, as well as pretty much all of the next few entries, because nothing gets my mind whirring quite like an ancient structure that no one knows what the hell it is, or what it was doing, or why it was even there. Let me introduce you to the Khatt Shebib, an ancient wall in southern Jordan that since its identification by British diplomat Sir Alec Kirkbride back in 1948 has had archaeologists scratching their heads ever since. I say identification because Kirkbride certainly didn't discover this structure per se, but instead he noticed that whilst he was flying over Jordan there was a very apparent and very clear line across the geographical landscape. A wall, in fact, that ran 150 kilometers, making it the longest linear archaeological site in Jordan. Now, why would anyone build a wall of such length? Now, the Romans had reason to with the Picts, ancient China had reason to with Genghis Khan, but Khatt Shebib? What's that all about? The thing is though, whilst the purpose of this wall is the frantic subject of debate, we do know who built it. The semi-nomadic Bedouin people led by the Arab prince Amir Shebib. Historically, there is a certain recognition of the Bedouin people using the wall, but there is still no concrete evidence to determine its purpose. Archaeologists during the 1940s and 1950s argued that the Khatt Shebib was used for military and defense purposes. However, there is a clear problem with that assumption. This wall is far too low for it to have ever been a successful defensive mechanism, and although it is massive in length, at best estimates it stood at around just 1.5 meters high. What was it keeping out? Not a lot. So then why have archaeologists also discovered over 100 ruined towers across its span? Yeah, more and more questions. Oh, and also, did I mention that best estimates point toward it being built in the Iron Age? Yeah, Khatt Shebib, everybody. A complete and utter mystery. Next up, at number 3, the Golan structure. Alright guys, if Khatt Shebib had you scratching your head, then the Golan structure is going to require some form of head scratching machinery. Let me introduce you to the Golan structure, also known as Rajum el-Hiri, an ancient megalithic monument that resides in the Israeli-occupied portion of Golan Heights, just off of the east coast of the Sea of Galilee. Made up of more than 42,000 basalt rocks arranged in concentric circles with a mound that is 15 foot tall at its centre, the Golan structure has often been referred to as the Stonehenge of the Levant. Why? Well, of course, because it dates back to at least the early Bronze Age, to between 3000 and 2700 BCE. So what is it? Who built it? What purpose did it serve? Yeah, that'll be a we don't have a freaking clue on pretty much all of those points. The outermost wall of this structure is 520 feet in diameter and 8 feet high, and since archaeological excavations have thus far yielded very few material remains, most Israeli archaeologists believe that this site was certainly not of a defensive position or a residential quarter, but most likely, as the vast majority of these enigmas are, it was a ritual center. And not only that, but a ritual center that is possibly linked to the cult of the dead. But on that note, there's even more of a mystery, because so far no human remains have ever been found at the site, only objects pointing to its function as some kind of tomb. And also, hold on to your hats guys, because this is where it gets weirder. At the centre of the Golan structure, the actual entrance to a tomb was discovered, one that during the June and December solstices, its axis is perfectly aligned with. Yeah. More questions, fewer answers. The thing is though, as its namesake as the Stonehenge of the Levant, no other structures of its kind have ever been discovered, which is even more of a head scratcher considering the fact that in ancient Britain as well as in South America, structures like this are pretty common. Some believe that its purpose was to worship Tammuz and Ishtar, the ancient Mesopotamian fertility gods. Others suggest that it was used by the Dakmas of the Zoroastrians to lay out their dead and let the birds remove the flesh from their bones. Some say that it was a calendar or a site to observe the constellations for religious calculations. Maybe it was all of these things at some point in time, but as it remains, we may never know. Coming in at number 2, the Great Lakes Copper Mystery. Oh boy, here we go. If you're not already feeling perplexed at the mysteries of the ancient world, then I'm fairly certain that this one will knock your metaphorical socks off. In the wilds of Michigan's Isle Royale National Park, it remains a beautiful and remote location, but thousands of years ago, the island was home to a thriving mining industry. Yes, mining. The rich veins of copper that ripple through the site's bedrock certainly drew the attention of the early Native Americans, and the fact that they diligently used this ore to make tools and jewelry is evident still. But the actual extent of their operation remains a complete and utter mystery. Why? Well, because around 6,500 years ago, there is clear and startling evidence to suggest that roughly 500,000 tons of copper was mined from the land. 500,000 tons of copper, which simply put is a staggering amount. Now, the copper culture complex is an astounding feat of ancient civilization regardless, but here is where our mystery takes another turn. You know why? Because Michigan copper is some of the purest copper on the planet. Keep that thought in mind. And 500,000 tons of it, well, frankly put, there should be more evidence to its use throughout the Midwest. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of a leap here, and I'm going to point us toward another ancient mystery, one that occurred off the coast of Turkey roughly around the 14th century BC. A shipwreck that was discovered just off the east shore of Uluburun, discovered by a sponge diver back in 1982. Now, the Uluburun shipwreck is a bit of a mystery in and of itself, but it's with the content of its cargo that we're concerned with here. Within the hull of the shipwreck, over 10 tons of copper oxide ingots were discovered. Now, oxide ingots, which are named so down to the fact that they are shaped with rectangular handholds on either side, were relatively common in the late Bronze Age period of the Mediterranean Sea. You know what is weird? Testing on these ingots later discovered that they were extraordinarily pure for others of its kind. In fact, more than 99.5% pure. The oxides themselves were brittle blister copper with voids and slag bits that only occur when multiple pourings were made outdoors over wood fires. There is only one type of ore of this purity, Michigan copper, the kind mined over 6,500 years ago in the copper culture complex of North America. Yeah, beats me guys. And finally coming in at number 1 spot, the Ness of Brodgar. And I absolutely adore this particular Neolithic mystery, and at the moment this is pretty much my direct inspiration for scholarly study of the ancient world. Now, we've covered this area quite a few times on this channel, and if you'd like to find out more about places like Skara Brae, the ancient site discovered on the Orkney Isles of northern Scotland, then please check out our Scottish history list, and also, you know, do your own discovering, because Neolithic Orkney is absolutely amazing. But there's another place that is even more remarkable than Skara Brae, the Ness of Brodgar, perhaps one of the most important discoveries in archaeological record depicting just what the hell was going on during the Neolithic period of ancient Britain. Now, back in 2003, in a site that occupies the central position with the Orkney archipelago that lies between the locks of Stenness and Harray, an imposing complex of monuments were discovered, a series of structures that seemingly were of pivotal importance to Neolithic Orcadians, and perhaps even further afield, perhaps even the whole of ancient Britain. The site itself, which lies between the already discovered Ring of Brodgar, a Neolithic stone circle that has its own mysteries, as well as the equally mysterious stones of Stenness, dates back to at least 3300 BC. As of 2016, 14 structures have been discovered, with many of them being built on top of each other, suggesting perhaps an even older use of this site and a location of incredible importance to the Neolithic people of ancient Britain. Without a doubt though, the most impressive structure, known as Structure 10, which appears to be a Neolithic pyramid, is even more of a head scratcher. Yeah, I just said Neolithic pyramid. Around this site, which was used prolifically up until around 2200 BCE, after which it abruptly stopped, archaeologists have since discovered the bones of approximately 400 cattle, around which the carcasses of several red deer were placed, with many of their tibia bones being cracked and extracted for marrow, suggesting the site of a feast. Do you know what's weirder though? During this event, there is also evidence of the temple being largely destroyed, brick by brick. Seemingly, for some reason, the Neolithic Orcadians built this site as a place of incredible importance, used it for 1,000 years, and then one day threw a party and tore the whole thing down. I have no idea, guys, but most importantly, I want to know. Kicking off at number 5, the tomb of Antony and Cleopatra. Now, the legendary Roman politician and general Marcus Antonius, alongside his kindred spirit Cleopatra, may well be the most notorious lovers in the history of our civilization, and although mountains upon mountains of literature have been written about their star-crossed fate, the real mystery of Antony and Cleopatra came after they had both slipped from this mortal coil. Now, if you know anything about the Roman conquest of Egypt, you'll know that around 30 BC, Mark Antony and Cleopatra were not in the Romans' best books, and a general known as Octavian had waged a long and bloody campaign to bring Cleopatra's reign to an end, which he ultimately won, but sadly for us, that's where the trail runs cold, with no leads as to the two lovers' final resting place. One of the greatest unsolved mysteries in antiquity is the exact location of the final burial place of Antony and Cleopatra, but according to several ancient historians, Tonius and Plutarch to name a few, it was recorded that Octavian had permitted the two to be buried together, as their surviving children were taken back to Rome to be raised as Roman citizens. There are several leads that their tomb was located somewhere west of Alexandria, but numerous excavations throughout history have proven fruitless. However, they did come close, and between 2008 and 2009, reports of the prestigious Egyptologist Zahi Hawass having found evidence of their fated tomb came to light. Although no concrete evidence has been unearthed, relics and memorial coins of the lovers have been found in small ceremonial tombs, perhaps pointing toward Cleopatra's and Antony's tomb being somewhere in the vicinity. The excavation continues, but whoever stumbles upon the tomb of Antony and Cleopatra will unearth one of history's greatest mysteries. Next up at number 4, the sack of Baltimore. And now, I love this particular entry, partly for its many layers and potential implications, but mainly for the fact that it's a swashbuckling tale of chaos and carnage that seemingly came out of nowhere. On June 20th, 1631, a small village named Baltimore in West Cork of Ireland was randomly and viciously attacked by pirates. Not just any pirates though, but pirates from the Barbary coast of North Africa, which at the time was synonymous with the Ottoman Empire. Now, if you couldn't tell, that's quite a distance. This incident would go down as the largest attack by Barbary pirates in both Ireland and Great Britain, and seemingly the target was a tiny village tucked in the corner of the Emerald Isle. So it posed the glaring question, Why? Was it just a random chance of opportunity after the pirates had drifted off course? Perhaps, but it's not likely. See, the attack was led by a Dutch captain by the name of Jan Jansvoon van Haarlem, who had changed his name to Murad Rees the Younger, which, if you can't tell, is a bit of a curveball. But that curveball may have actually been thrown by someone else entirely. You see, despite being a small village, Baltimore was actually in the middle of a power play. At the time, it was under the control of a Gaelic chieftain, Sir Finian O'Driscoll, but the nearby English colony of Cork, led by a man named Sir Walter Coppinger, also had Baltimore in his sights. History is unclear as to who pulled which string, but all signs point toward the bizarre pirate attack being orchestrated by someone else entirely, in the hopes of seizing power away from O'Driscoll. In fact, several texts have even suggested that O'Driscoll's own relatives may have orchestrated the move, as they'd been exiled to Spain following defeat at the Battle of Kinsale. Whoever did it overestimated the bloodthirst of the Barbary pirates though, because following the raid, Baltimore was virtually deserted for several generations. The best laid plans of mice and men, yeah, you know what they say. Coming up next at number 3, St. John's Dance. And you may have heard mention of this one before, but perhaps not in this context. You see, it's important that we note that in modern times, St. John's Dance, or St. Vitus's Dance, is a terrible disease also known as Sydenham's chorea that affects the nervous system and results in a series of hysterical jerking movements of the limbs, often exhibited in young children. Generally speaking, it isn't infectious, but that doesn't figure to explain the countless records of mass hysterical dancing that occurred throughout history, of literally thousands of people across Europe being afflicted by a manic need to dance. The earliest known outbreak occurred in the 7th century and was primarily thought to occur during times of intense hardship, particularly affecting the peasant and working classes. So what? You're a peasant in Dark Age Europe and all of a sudden you just start dancing and can't stop, somehow infecting the rest of your village, town or city, until there's a horde of people doing the exact same thing, potentially collapsing from exhaustion or dying from a heart attack. Well, yeah, because that's exactly what happened. One of the most well-documented cases was in 1518 in the Austrian city of Strasbourg, where a woman named Frau Troffia began dancing in the streets, and within a month, 400 people had joined her. Yeah, she danced for a month and loads of people died. Now, there are many theories on the true explanation of St. John's Dance, and scholars still argue as to whether it truly was a real contagious disease or merely a social phenomenon. One of those theories suggests a particular fungi had infected their crops, and another suggests that it was all a misunderstanding and St. John's Dance was actually the practice of some secretive European cult. Yeah. Beats me, guys. Swinging in at number 2, the remains of Richard III. And this one, strangely enough, is the perfect blend of ancient mystery and potentially contemporary unexplainable intrigue. Because that's exactly what you all came for, right? Also, I mean, this one is already pretty much solved, but it's in the details where its mystery truly shines. We all know Richard III, right? A horse, my kingdom for a horse. But well, apparently this woman, Scottish author and historian Philippa Langley, knew him a little bit better than anyone else did. Now, it's important to note that history had long forgotten the final resting place of Richard III, the last Plantagenet king of England, and after his defeat at the Battle of Bosworth, his remains were scattered to the winds of history. After all, history is written by the winners. Well, let's fast forward to modern times when in September 2012, Philippa Langley led an excavation of a car park in Leicester city centre. A few signs pointed toward it potentially being the ruined remains of Greyfriars Church, but in the words of Langley, she had a strange feeling, one that she couldn't quite place, and something was telling her that Richard III was buried beneath that very car park. Now, the dig team was on a very tight budget and only had one chance at excavating a tiny portion of the car park. And guess what? The exact place that Philippa Langley had a strange feeling about turned out to be the final resting place of Richard III's remains. And not only that, but the parking space that he was buried beneath was marked with a large painted R on the tarmac, used to signify a reserved parking space. I mean, all of this can be explained away, right? Eventually someone would have found the remains of the dead king, but you can't deny the fact that the strange cosmic coincidence that led Langley to his final resting place is much more mysterious than a dead English king in a car park. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the Tunguska event. And I absolutely love this entry for its cosmic significance alone and the potential warning sign that we should all be very wary of. Let's head on over to remote Siberia, where on the bright summer morning of the 30th of June 1908, a massive impact explosion, the likes of which has never before been seen in human history, completely flattened a remote area of the Siberian wilderness, covering over 2,000 square kilometers of isolated forest. As far as we know, no one was caught in the blast, but if they were, they would have certainly been obliterated by a shockwave 1,000 times greater than that of the Hiroshima atomic bomb. The Tunguska explosion completely flattened over 80 million trees in its blast radius, rupturing their roots like grass to a lawnmower. 50 or so miles away, those native to the region were knocked flat on their feet by the blast, windows shattered and buildings subsided. For all intents and purposes, it was the result of an unimaginable power. And if Tunguska had occurred over a metropolitan area, an entire city would have likely been flattened. So, what was it? Well, the leading scientific consensus is that the explosion of the Tunguska event was caused by the impact of a small asteroid, one that had possibly burned up in Earth's atmosphere and then produced a shockwave that resulted in the aforementioned cataclysm. However, not everyone buys that hypothesis, and many other researchers and scientists have proposed the Tunguska event being the result of a leak of natural gas from deep within the Earth's crust that became ignited by a storm and resulted in the Tunguska hellfire. Most evidence though points towards Tunguska being the result of an asteroid, albeit one that luckily somehow missed the vast majority of our entire populated planet. It's also important to note that researchers believe Tunguska to be the result of a small asteroid, which is a terrifying thought in itself. It poses an incredibly important question: how would our history have been shaped if the Tunguska event occurred somewhere else? What if its intended target had changed? And more importantly, are we prepared if it ever happens again? Kicking off at number 5, Omm Sety. And this is an incredibly interesting case because if the implications are true, then it exists in 2 separate timelines. Both the early 20th century and, believe it or not, in late 1200 BC. Let me explain. On January 16th, 1904, a girl by the name of Dorothy Eady was born in the London suburb of Blackheath to 2 Irish middle-class parents, Reuben Eady, a master tailor, and her mother, Caroline Eady. At the age of 3, Dorothy suffered a terrible fall from a flight of stairs that by all rights should have killed her, but after she had recovered in hospital, in the years that followed, she started to exhibit strange behaviours. She suddenly had developed a keen interest in ancient Egypt and began talking in a strange, otherworldly accent. At Catholic school, she was thrown out for declaring her love for Osiris and her longing to return to what she referred to as the old religion. After being taken by her parents to the British Museum, she saw a photograph of the New Kingdom Temple and loudly declared, "This is my home, but where are all the trees? Where is the garden?" It turned out that the photograph was the temple of Seti I, the father of Ramses the Great. Dorothy became transfixed with the museum and would visit every day, claiming that she was back amongst her peoples. In her later life, she would become heavily involved in the study of Egyptology, where she moved to Cairo and changed her name to Omm Sety. This is where it gets crazy, because she then claimed that over a 12-month period, she was visited by an apparition known as Hor-Ra. In perfect hieroglyphics, she wrote a 70-page text dictating her former life as a priestess at the Temple of Seti. And despite pretty much every attempt to trip her up, her story was terrifyingly accurate. So much so that the garden that she claimed existed as a child turned out actually did. She led archaeologists to a site in the temple ruins, and excavations uncovered a garden that perfectly matched her descriptions. Pretty spooky, right? Next up at number 4, the Antikythera mechanism. If you know anything about the legendary Antikythera mechanism, then you'll know that it's pretty much baffled scientists since its discovery way back in 1901. Now, it may look like some kind of weird piece of ancient metal, but the real kicker is that the Antikythera mechanism appears to be the first instance of an analog computer that, get this, potentially dates back to 200 BC. It was found amongst the wreckage retrieved off the coast of the Greek island Antikythera, and it is believed to have been designed and constructed by ancient Greek scientists. But what exactly were the ancient Greeks doing with a clockwork computer? Well, it appears that they may have been scanning the stars. The device itself is a series of complex clockwork mechanisms comprised of at least 30 meshing bronze gears. Now, detailed imaging of the mechanism suggests that it had 37 gear wheels that enabled it to follow the movements of the moon and sun throughout the zodiac, and could predict eclipses to pinpoint accuracy and even model the irregular orbit of our moon. What is absolutely crazy about the Antikythera mechanism is that the knowledge of this technology was evidently lost at some point in antiquity, and anything even remotely correlating to its design didn't appear again until the development of mechanical astronomical clocks in Europe in, get this, the 14th century. It is living proof that our ancient ancestors had a much more capable grasp on the mysteries of our existence than anyone has ever expected. If only the Library of Alexandria hadn't burned down, eh? Swinging in at number 3, the Amber Room. Now, as far as ancient mysteries go, this one is perhaps the most recent, although the design and creation of the mysterious Amber Room dates back to the early 17th century. Now, the precious gemstone of amber has enthralled Europeans for countless generations, and in particular the Russian aristocracy, so much so that in 1716 Peter the Great was gifted an entire room built out of the stuff to celebrate the peace between Russia and Prussia. It was originally installed at the Charlottenburg Palace, home of Frederick I, the first king of Prussia, and Peter the Great loved it so much that Friedrich was like, "You can have it, bud, we're friends now." The room consisted of 180 square feet of pure decadence, glowing with over 6 tons of amber, which were backed with panels upon panels of gold leaf. Today, historians estimate that the original Amber Room would have been worth over $142 million, and is often considered to be the 8th wonder of the world. So, where is it? Well, of course, in 1941, Adolf Hitler initiated Operation Barbarossa, and 3 million German soldiers ravaged their way into the Soviet Union. Inevitably, the Amber Room was seized, tore down by German troops, packed up into 27 crates and shipped back to Germany, where it was on display at Königsberg Castle until 1943. But in the final months of that year, the end of the war was in sight, and the Amber Room was dismantled, ready to ship away in case the castle was destroyed by Allied forces. That's where the case goes cold, and the trail of the Amber Room was lost to history. Some say that the Amber Room is still hidden within the ruins of the castle, others believe it to have been straight up destroyed in the bombings. There are those that claim it was loaded onto a ship and can be found somewhere at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. The truth remains that we may never know, but it's one of history's most mysterious treasures. Next up at number 2, the fall of Angkor Wat. Now, the fall of the Khmer Empire, a highly advanced state-level society that proliferated in mainland Southeast Asia between the 9th and 15th centuries AD, has puzzled both archaeologists and historians for decades, culminating in the majestic ruins of its capital city, Angkor Wat. The Khmer Empire were incredibly advanced for their time and were noted for their enormous monumental architecture and their extensive trade partnership between India, China, and the rest of the world. They had a massive road system, evidence of advanced agricultural technology, and were most of all famous for their highly complex hydrological system that took advantage of the region's monsoonal complex, efficiently carving out a civilization in a tropical rainforest. Now, the traditional date for the empire's collapse is 1431, when Angkor Wat was sacked by the rival kingdom of Siam. But the reality of it is, no one really knows. Seemingly, while evidence suggests pockets of the empire remained, for the most part, they just disappeared. However, there may be an equally terrifying reason for their demise. Angkor Wat was constructed as a hydraulic city. It was a demonstration of ingenious technology that harnessed water and flow from the Siem Reap River in a highly advanced manner. But one of the leading theories of Angkor Wat's demise is suggestive evidence of a massive flood. Now, a flood of such stature doesn't seem to appear in any recorded annals of the time, but evidence of extensive water damage to the masonry is the only clue that historians have. Flash flood? Yeah, more than likely, but what caused it? That's anyone's guess. And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the Bimini Road. And talking of water, our final entry is completely submerged in the stuff, as in it lies at the bottom of the ocean bed just off the coast of the Bahamas. And what is it? Well, it's a road seemingly constructed from sub-rectangular limestone blocks that spans half a mile, 18 feet below the water. Yeah, and what's it doing there? Well, you bet no one has a clue, as in really no one has any idea how it got there or even what it is, despite over 50 years of extensive research. The Bimini Road has been examined by geologists, archaeologists of all kind, anthropologists, marine engineers, pretty much anyone and everyone with any ancient underwater credibility, all of which have shrugged their shoulders at any reasonable explanation. Well, first off, how old is it? Again, no one knows, despite irregularities in carbon dating from various other materials from the area, which has split researchers into 2 camps. Proponents of the road being man-made, and those that believe it is a natural geological occurrence. Now, usually geologists are pretty damn good at pinpointing the age of any given mineral, but not with the Bimini Road, as carbon datings have varied widely from being 1500, 3000, and 15,000 years old. Listen guys, there are so many potential consequences to the implications of the Bimini Road. It could just be nothing at all, a weird freak collection of rocks, but it also could be evidence of a larger settlement long lost to the deep blue sea, and the fact that numerous credible researchers from both camps can't come to an agreement is reason enough to give the Bimini Road some kind of thought. Well, I'll leave this one in your hands, horror fans. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. The Bimini Road, man. What is it? Kicking off at number 5, the Lost Roman Legion. A mystery that has baffled Roman historians for eons. The Legio IX Hispania, or the 9th Legion, also commonly known as the Lost Legion, was one of the most renowned fighting forces of the Roman Empire that existed from the 1st century BC until at least 120 AD. They collected countless battles and victories across the Empire's influence, participating in the Siege of Asculum in 90 BC, as well as fighting ferociously beside Mark Antony in the Battle of Actium. Following the assassination of Caesar, they were one of the Senate's most powerful military tools and battled the Cantabrians of Spain as well as the Germanic tribes of the Rhine borderlands. And after that, their successes led them to Britain, where they participated in the Roman invasion led by Emperor Claudius, and it is thought that they were stationed there all the way until 120 AD. And then they disappeared. Completely, seemingly fell off the face of the earth. Now, the Romans were incredibly diligent record keepers. It's why we know so much about them and why they made extensive records of every military battle and confrontation, even their losses, so they could better develop their imperial machine. And the 9th Legion, after seemingly heading to Scotland to fight the Picts and Celtic tribes, just disappeared. No notes, no records, nothing. Now, the Lost Legion was made up of over 5,000 men, and somehow, in the strange mists of time, they all completely disappeared. I guess we'll never know. Coming in at number 4, the Sky Caves of Nepal. Also known as the Mustang Caves, the Sky Caves of Nepal are a collection of over 10,000 man-made caves dug deep into the sides of the Himalayan Valley in the Mustang district of Nepal. This place has absolutely baffled archaeologists and researchers since their discovery in the mid-90s, when local explorers began venturing inside the stacked caves and found several dozen partially mummified human bodies, all at least between 2,000 and 3,000 years old. Further exploration of these caves has led to discoveries of valuable Buddhist paintings, sculptures, manuscripts, and numerous ancient artifacts that is thought to belong to the 12th and 14th century. But the fact that the Sky Caves seem to predate them by over at the least 2,000 years has offered no answer to the burning question: who built these caves and why? Since 1996, the Sky Caves of Nepal have been listed as a UNESCO tentative site, and the Mustang region was formerly known as the Kingdom of Lo until its annexation by Nepal at the end of the 18th century. This in turn made it a restricted demilitarized area until 1992, making it one of the most preserved and isolated regions on the planet. Seemingly, whoever was making these caves have been there for at least 3,000 years, burying their dead in elaborate ritualistic ceremonial sky tombs, and no one has any idea why. Swinging in at number 3, the Ridgeway Hill Viking Burial Pit. And this one is so heavy metal that I have no idea. It could literally make up the plot of a Clive Barker film. In September 2008, archaeologists from Oxford Archaeology began excavating along the route of the A354 when they discovered a burial pit on nearby Ridgeway Hill containing the bodies of what appeared to be 54 Viking mercenaries. And all of them were decapitated. Not only were they all decapitated though, but when their remains were discovered, it was found that they were all in relatively neat little piles. Their heads in one pile, their torsos in another, like some kind of ancient hunting grounds visitor attraction. Researchers are stumped about the Ridgeway Hill pit. There are no leading theories, and the vast majority of it just doesn't make sense. Carbon dating found that their remains dated back to between 970 and 1025 AD. And they were all of Scandinavian origin and carried the physiques of warriors. One leading theory is that the group was somehow ambushed by nearby villagers and ceremoniously slaughtered, but that makes zero sense and has no ties to the known ritualistic practices of the native Britons. Also, markings on the Vikings' bones showed that the method of execution was a bizarre mix of crude and incredibly precise blows, and there was a total of 188 wounds visible on the skeletons, an average of 4 per Viking, one of which had the top of his skull sliced off, exposing his brain. Vampiric blood ritual, ancient cult sacrifice, I have no idea, but the Ridgeway Hill pit doesn't make any sense at all. Next up at number 2, Gobekli Tepe. And to be honest, I could talk about Gobekli Tepe all day, because what the hell is going down in that place we'll maybe never know. Gobekli Tepe, which is Turkish for Potbelly Hill, is an ancient megalithic site that was evidently used for social ritualistic practices. Oh, and also it dates back to the 10th millennium BC. At the least. Just look at this place and you'll understand exactly why this is so insanely baffling, during a time which most anthropologists agree we as humans were primitive hunter-gatherers. But nah, Gobekli Tepe seems to say otherwise, with the structure itself making up patterns of absolutely massive T-shaped stone pillars, more than 200 of them, which form around 20 separate circles and are currently the world's oldest known megaliths, older than Stonehenge. Do you know the kind of ingenuity it takes to build a structure like that? So during a time when mankind was seemingly roaming the plains hunting mammoths, we were actually building incomprehensibly vast structures. Klaus Schmidt, who was a leading German archaeologist, held the belief that Gobekli Tepe was a vastly important pilgrimage destination and a somewhat cathedral for a primitive cult of the dead. Though no tombs or graves have ever been found at the site, Schmidt believed that they remain to be discovered, hidden in niches located behind the temple walls. It's important to note that the vast majority of Gobekli Tepe is yet to be unearthed, and mainstream archaeology has primarily ignored this site. For all intents and purposes, it may be one of the most important ancient structures of our species. As Ian Hodder of Stanford University says, Gobekli Tepe changes everything. And finally, our number one spot, the Sphinx. And bear with me, because there is one ancient structure that is beyond baffling: the Sphinx and the perpetual mystery that surrounds it. Now, I'm a stickler for science, but there is something about the Great Sphinx of Giza that just doesn't add up. Now, hear me out, because the vast majority of Egyptologists claim that the Sphinx is 4,512 years old, which would have meant it was built in the year 2494 BC. But that completely ignores the fact that there are certain very clear weathering patterns on the Sphinx that do not occur in any other ancient structures in the area, the Great Pyramids included. Author John Anthony West, alongside geologist Robert M. Schoch, found very clear evidence of water erosion on the structure, which is not consistent of the environmental climate patterns of the given time. These patterns and the effect of water erosion would be consistent in a time when Egypt was a wet and rainy landscape, meaning that the Sphinx would have had to be between 7,000 and 10,000 years old. On another note, between 1991 and 1993, when West's team were examining the Sphinx, they found evidence of hollow, regularly shaped spaces and chambers between the pores and at either side of the structure. Egyptologists completely put an end to their examination and forbid any other work. The mysteries of the Sphinx are countless, and one thing is for certain: they're not being fully explored by modern research. Well, what do you guys think about the mystery of the Sphinx? Let us know in the comment box down below. I know you will. Kicking off at number 5, the Dyatlov Pass incident, which is perhaps one of the most unexplainable mysteries of the modern era as far as intention goes. Granted, I will admit that the Dyatlov Pass incident may not necessarily be explained by an act of the occult, the most likely explanation being a logical yet tragically coincidental accident. But you've got to admit, the red flags are there. On January 25th, 1959, 9 Russian students set out on a journey across the Otorten mountain range, nestled deep in the northern Urals. They would never be seen alive again. Their tent was originally found by a search party after they'd been missing for over a month. It was found on the uppermost slope of Khatt Shebib, or Mountain of the Dead in the native language of northern Siberia. All 9 of the students were seasoned hikers and skiers, yet the scene told a different story. Their bodies were found scattered in various bizarre spots around the tent's location. Some of them had burrowed up to 15 feet beneath the snow. Most of them were naked, with a string of bewildering anomalies. One of them, Lyudmila Dubinia, was missing her tongue and eyes. Others had broken bones and massive internal trauma, but perplexingly, no external injuries, not even a scratch. Whatever happened on the Mountain of the Dead remains shrouded in mystery. Coming in next at number 4, the San Francisco Satanic Beheading. On the 8th of February 1989, a homeless man, Leroy Carter Jr., was sleeping rough in the Golden Gate Park of San Francisco. That night, he was brutally attacked and murdered. After the authorities arrived on the scene the next morning, they discovered that his head had been cut off. Not only that, but it was nowhere to be found. They scoured the crime scene, but it had appeared that the head was missing. Bizarrely, perhaps the only clue at the crime scene was a headless chicken, which had been partly stuffed into Leroy Carter Jr.'s neck. The San Francisco police were baffled. They called in a specialist, Officer Sandy Gallant, who had built her career around occult crimes. From the beginning, she realized that the murder was perhaps related to a ritual involved in Palo Mayombe, a black magic offshoot of the religion Santeria. Their intention was to make a ritualized brew from Leroy Carter's brain. Strangely enough though, she also predicted that the head would be returned to the crime scene after 42 days, in completion of the ritual. Well, lo and behold, right on schedule, the head was returned exactly 42 days later. However, no one had taken Officer Sandy Gallant seriously, and no one was watching the crime scene to make an arrest. The ritualistic murderer escaped justice, and the case remains unsolved to this day. Next up at number 3, Pauline Picard. And this story is crazy, and we're going all the way back to April 1922 in the rural area of Brittany, France. On one fateful day, little Pauline Picard, who was just 2 years old at the time, disappeared from her family's farm. No one had seen her wander off, and seemingly she had vanished without a trace. All search parties failed to find her, yet strangely enough, a few days later, local police received news that a little girl who matched exactly the description of Pauline Picard had been found alone wandering around the town of Cherbourg, which was over 300 kilometers away. Pauline's mother identified her via photograph, and the police were satisfied that it was the same girl. I know, right? This case is absolutely insane, but hold on, because it gets weirder. Because about a month later, a farmer that was walking near the Picard farm stumbled upon the last thing that anybody expected to find. It was the mutilated and decomposing body of a young girl, perhaps 2 years old. Next to her was a pile of neatly folded clothes. When the townspeople arrived, Pauline's parents included, they discovered that the folded clothes were the exact same ones that Pauline had been wearing on the day that she disappeared. It was thought by police that the body had been deliberately placed. The crime scene was pristine. Even weirder though, I told you guys, was the fact that the skull of an adult male had been placed next to the body. If that was Pauline's body, then who was the other kid? What happened to Pauline? And what the hell is going on with that mysterious skull? Well, no one knows, and the strange case of little Pauline Picard remains France's greatest unsolved mystery. Swinging in next at number 2, Janette DePalma. On the chilly afternoon of Monday, August 7th, 1972, 16-year-old Janette DePalma left her house in Springfield Township, New Jersey, to meet a friend, let her mother know that she was taking the train on the way. She was never seen alive again. After her disappearance, her parents filed a missing person report with the Springfield police, but the case went cold. That is until 6 weeks later, on September 19th, when the skeletal remains of Janette DePalma were found at the top of Springfield's Hoodale Quarry. This is where things get weird and raises the question of a potential fault in the police investigation. According to several witnesses, her remains were surrounded by a pattern of strange occultist objects, adorned into a coffin-shaped parameter of wicker branches and small wooden makeshift symbols. It is claimed by some residents of Springfield that this pattern was in actual fact a pentagram. Janette DePalma's autopsy did not reveal a cause of death, although the coroner suspected strangulation. Even more bizarrely were the high amounts of lead found in her body, yet no explanation for this was given either. Eventually the case went cold, and the tragic murder of Janette DePalma remains a mystery to this day. And finally, at our number 1 spot, Bella in the Wych Elm. Who put Bella down the Wych Elm is a common question asked in the West Midlands area of Hagley near Birmingham. I've seen it myself, often written in scrawling graffiti on brick walls. It's a mystery that has perplexed the Midlands for over half a century, yet still remains to be answered. On April the 18th, 1943, 4 young boys went poaching in the woods of the Hagley Hall estate, thinking they'd find some bird nests ripe for picking. After climbing a wych elm tree, the then 15-year-old Bob Farmer made a much more gruesome discovery. Inside the hollow opening of the tree's trunk, wedged tightly inside, were the skeletal remains of a woman, entirely complete save for one missing hand. Police were dispatched to the scene and found it exactly as described. Later, buried near the tree, they found the woman's severed hand along with several items of clothing believed to belong to her. Locals dubbed her Bella, and rumours stirred of a witch's coven, black magic and occultist execution. Police investigation later discovered that the woman, who was believed to be between 35 and 40, had been placed into the Trees Hollow while still warm, where she had remained hidden for at least 18 months. Nothing else is known about Bella and how she ended up in the Wych Elm, and it remains one of England's most terrifying occult mysteries.